You know when you're really used to doing something and for so long that after a while you just think, oh hey, I can actually do this. That's what I thought about reading. I read a lot. I read as much as my schedule allows me in my free time, and I read a lot for work as well. My law degree basically consisted of reading, my master's degree basically consisted of reading, and after a while I thought, well, I must know how to read. And then I read a book on how to read a book. And I kid you not, the book is literally called How to Read a Book, and it was written by Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren, and it basically blew my mind. In today's video, I want to cover some of the essentials of this particular title, but I will not cover the entire book because that would basically destroy the experience of reading it yourself. The book is divided into 4 parts, and I will cover the essential topics of the first 2. Part 3 and 4 focus more on how to read specific types of genres and how to really master syntopical reading, so I will leave those for your own reading pleasure. Let's start with the goals of reading. You can read for information and you can read for understanding and learning. Pulling information out of a text is a prerequisite for learning. You can't understand the contents of a book without at least getting in the information it's trying to convey. However, being informed should not be your ultimate goal. Your goal should be reading for the sake of increased understanding. Knowing how to read well will help you accomplish this. Intermediate reading skills are better used to allow you to take information out of books. But the real reading techniques that may take years to properly develop and reinforce, are the ones that really allow you to understand what you're reading. There are 4 reading levels. That means that if you want to learn the next level of reading, you need to master your current one. The first level is elementary reading. Here you are concerned with the language. What does a sentence say? Can you identify the words themselves and perceive what they mean? This is how everyone starts reading, but it really doesn't help you really understand the contents of the book or text you are analyzing. Inspectional reading is level number 2. When you read at this level, your goal is to examine the surface of the book. That's why this level is also identified as skimming or pre-reading. With inspectional reading, you should be able to understand what kind of book it is and its main structure. Analytical reading is a more complex and systematic kind of reading. It should be thorough, complete. The best reading you can actually do. Analytical reading means the reader must ask many organized questions about the topic of the book. It is intensely active. Here you should work at the book until it becomes your own. In the words of the author, reading a book analytically is chewing and digesting it. Finally, we have syntopical reading, which can also be called comparative reading. Here, the reader reads many books to interpret one. It's comparison of texts, but also a way to build an analysis of the subject that is not in any specific book. Mastering the third level of reading, analytical reading, should be your main purpose here. Analytical reading, however, should not be used for mere entertainment or to obtain information passively. It should be used to work in the information. It's the fundamental reading process every student should engage in. However, there is no analytical reading without inspectional reading. You see, inspectional reading is like scanning a book. With the right techniques, you're able to identify the subject matter, the most relevant topics, and its purpose. A huge part of this is actually skimming. Sometimes skimming has a weird connotation where it's considered an inferior reading method. But it's not. It should always precede analytical reading. And most of all, it's a completely valid reading technique you should implement when you're short of time. The authors of How to Read a Book actually created a list of suggestions to become better at skimming. A few of them are read the titles, subtitles, or other indications of the scope or aim of the book, or the author's special angle on the subject. Study the table of contents to obtain a general sense of the book's structure, like a roadmap to the book. Find the chapters that are fundamental to the book's main argument. If these chapters have summary statements in their opening or closing pages, you should be reading those statements carefully. Turn the pages, dipping in here and there, reading a paragraph or two, sometimes several pages in sequence, but never more than that. You should always be looking for signs of the main subject and understand the purpose and author's angle. But let's return to analytical reading. As I've just mentioned, analytical reading requires the reader to ask the right questions and do so throughout the entire book. But the essence of active reading is asking 4 basic questions to the book you're reading. What is the book about as a whole? What is being said in detail and how? Is the book true in whole or part? And what about its significance? And now you ask, how can I ask questions to a book? Well, that is part of the difficulty of reading. You see, you need to answer the questions you ask. Asking these questions is part of your duty as a reader. This is where the difference lies between the demanding and the undemanding reader. These also apply to anything worth reading, from a book to an article. Reading while you are thinking about these questions and seeking the right answers in the process is part of the difficulty of really knowing how to read. And a demanding reader is able to use some methods to make a book their own. That is, picking the work of an author and analyzing it to the point that the resulting analysis transforms your perception of the book into something new. There are many different ways to do this, but one of the core techniques is intelligently marking or annotating your book. As you can see, analytical reading has rules and a structure. Picking up a book and reading it from page 1 doesn't cut it for analytical reading. If you do that, you're not truly grasping the contents of the book. This doesn't apply necessarily to books that you read for entertainment. Books for entertainment can be read without going into full analytical reading mode, although they have their own rules, as you can find out if you read part 3 of this book. So rule number 1 of analytical reading is knowing what kind of book you are reading as early in the process as possible. This means you need to know the genre of the book as well as the setting and type of content. This can be done if you engage in inspectional reading or skimming. You read a title, subtitle, table of contents, glance at the preface and dust jacket, and you probably get a general idea of what that particular title is all about. On to rule number 2. You should state the unity of the whole book in a single sentence, or at most a few sentences. Basically, you must say what the whole book is about as briefly as possible. This doesn't cover the categories you should be seeking in rule number 1. Rather, you should try to describe the purpose of the book in a sentence. You need to discover its theme or main point. Rule number 3 is understanding how the major parts of the book are organized into a whole. A good book, like a good house, is an orderly arrangement of parts, and each major part has a certain amount of independence. If the book you are analyzing conveys a major theory that unifies the entire book, you now need to understand how each argument contributes to the theory and helps build it from scratch. Each argument will tie to other arguments, but it will also be sufficiently independent to be considered an argument in itself. You can do this by learning how to outline a book, basically uncover the skeleton that the book conceals. And finally, rule number 4. Find out what the author's problems were. Usually, a good book starts with a questions or a set of questions, and then proceeds to answer them throughout the remaining chapters. To comply with this rule, you should be able to state the main question that the book tries to answer, and you should be able to state the subordinate questions in case the main question is complex or has a lot of parts. These questions can be theoretical or practical. Does something exist? What kind of thing is it? What purpose does it serve? And then, what things must one do to gain a certain objective? Under what conditions would it be better to do this rather than that? I mean, really, there are thousands of different questions an author can ask and answer throughout the book, but they will always be theoretical or practical. It's your job as a reader to understand which questions apply to the content of certain books and which questions don't. There's so much more to cover on meaning, terms, and the author's message. They are also part of the reading process, especially analytical reading, but they are complex tasks that require a whole separate analysis that I cannot cover in this video. If you're feeling a bit overwhelmed about all of this, and believe me, I'm feeling overwhelmed after recording this voiceover, I really recommend you to grab How to Read a Book and just experience the full thing, because it really is a phenomenal guide. If you want to listen to it for free, you can do so with your Audible subscription, who's sponsoring today's video. This subscription lets you listen to this title as well as other thousands of audiobooks. Despite the social distancing, you can use Audible to learn more, reduce stress, and stay entertained. You can download their titles and listen offline anywhere and anytime, which means you can grasp the contents of entire books while you're commuting, cleaning, or even meal prepping. The app itself is free and can be installed in all devices, so you can browse their huge catalog and purchase individual titles even without a subscription. Also, even if you use multiple devices, you'll never lose the page where you were in your audiobook because it synchronizes across your computer, smartphone, and iPad. Also, with the holiday offer, you can try Audible Plus for $4.95 per month for your first 6 months. This is the best deal Audible has offered this year, so don't forget to go to audible.com/Mariana or text Mariana to 500 to get your 6 months for almost half the price and start writing down the list of titles you want to listen to in 2021. I really hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you next week. Bye guys!